Hello, and welcome to this tutorial on how to use the CallCabinet for Microsoft Teams installer. Once you have registered and downloaded the installer, simply right-click the installation file and run with PowerShell to start the process. Please ensure that only a person with full administrative access to your organization's Azure tenant and Active Directory runs this tool. First, the installer will validate the required PowerShell modules in your local environment. This is required to install the components on your behalf for Microsoft Teams recording. These modules are as follows: the Nugget Provider, AZ Accounts, Azure AD, and Microsoft Teams. Once the installer has validated the required modules, click Next. Your organization's administrator will then need to log into your organization's Azure tenant using an administrative account. The installer will then automatically fetch all the subscriptions associated with the Azure tenant that is logged in. As soon as the login is confirmed, your organization's administrator then needs to select the appropriate Azure subscription, Azure region, and CallCabinet site to continue. The installer will now do the following automated tasks on your organization's Azure tenant. Firstly, it will create a new resource group called CallCabinet Bot in your tenant. Then it will create and configure a new Azure bot in the CallCabinet Bot resource group. It'll then configure Microsoft Teams channel for the new bot and create and configure an Azure recording application in your Azure tenant. It'll then set API permissions for a recording application and register your Azure bot with the CallCabinet Teams recording service. It will then create a new Microsoft Teams recording policy in your Microsoft Teams instance and create a new recording group in your Azure Active Directory. Any exceptions or errors during this process will be displayed in the output box of the installer. Should a severe exception occur, your organization administrator may be forced to close the application and contact CallCabinet support for assistance. Should there be no or less severe exceptions, your administrator will be able to continue with the process. At this point, the installer will request to confirm consent for the required permissions in your organization's Azure tenant. The required permissions will be displayed, and your organization's administrator will need to give consent. Upon clicking Accept, your administrator will be redirected to a CallCabinet web page that will acknowledge consent before returning to the installer. Your organization's administrator will then need to log into your Microsoft Teams instance using an administrator account. The CallCabinet for Microsoft Teams installer will then automate the following tasks in your organization's Microsoft Teams instance and Azure Active Directory. First, it'll create an application instance. It'll create a compliance recording policy and a compliance recording application. It'll set a compliance recording policy and a compliance recording application and create an Azure AD group and assign that group policy to an AD group. This is the final part of the process. The organization's administrator will now need to specify which members or users of your organization will be recorded by CallCabinet. Once you're done, click Finish. You may now begin to set up users in your Azure portal. If you require any assistance, please reach out to us at support@callcabinet.com.